Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, we are going back under the mountain. We are going to take our first steps into the deep dark biome, and we're going to be talking about the Sculk family of blocks down there. We are not going to approach the ancient city just yet. We're going to save that for another time because that's another challenge entirely with its own set of rewards. But before we do any of that, I wanted to leave night to fall for a little while because I've spent a bit of time repairing all of my tools, including some of the tools we're going to be using today. We're going to need the Silk Touch hoe that I have stashed here in my ender chest, but I wanted to make sure that while I was repairing my tools, a few day and night cycles happened without me sleeping, because we need to talk about something that we've not yet really had a chance to talk about a great deal, and that is phantoms. Phantoms are flying creatures that will spawn at night if you have not slept for at least 3 days, and so at the moment I should have a large enough tally of days where I haven't slept that at some point phantoms will appear, at which point we can start to explain what they are and how to avoid them. I'm also going to take the time to fight a couple of endermen since they're appearing around here, because we do need some ender pearls for an upcoming episode where we'll be traveling to the stronghold and potentially going to the end dimension where endermen originate. So getting a couple of extra ender pearls is going to be worth the additional damage to my armor and my shield if I end up taking a few hits from these guys. And even with only looting 2 on this sword, I managed to pick up 6 ender pearls, so that's really not bad. Well, it's kind of unfortunate that it's now raining, and it turns out that I had slept more recently than I expected to, because the phantoms didn't show up on the first couple of nights, and I had to spend a couple more nights hanging around. But these are phantoms. And the way they attack you is to swoop down from the sky, and they turn kind of slowly, so if you strafe in a circle you can sort of avoid them, which I'm doing here to get a better look at them. But they are, technically speaking, undead mobs. They are night terrors of sorts that sort of appear when you end up not sleeping for a couple of nights. They are the wraiths that appear almost as part of your imagination from being so tired and not having slept. And the longer you spend not sleeping, the more phantoms will appear during the night. So it is possible to get a great deal of them circling in the sky above you if you've not slept for a long enough period of time. If you manage to kill them, they drop Phantom Membrane, which doesn't have a great deal of uses to us right now, but can be used to brew potions of slow falling. Kind of gives you the ability to glide a little bit in the same way that the phantoms do, and that can be quite useful in a variety of situations. It will also prevent you from taking any fall damage on contact with the ground, since you simply fall too slowly for the fall damage to have any impact. But of course, in order to acquire any Phantom Membrane, you have to spend a couple of nights not sleeping and then deal with the phantoms when they arrive, which is easy enough to do with a sword and a bow and proper strafing technique, but if you're not expecting them, they can be a little bit difficult to manage. If you want to avoid phantoms appearing, the solution is fairly obvious. Make sure you sleep whenever night falls, and make sure you sleep at least once every 3 days. This will reset a behind-the-scenes insomnia counter, which counts down to a night when phantoms will appear. But phantoms also do not appear if you are in caves or any kind of indoor environment. So as long as you have a solid, opaque block over your head, phantoms are not going to spawn in the sky. They will simply spawn the next time you go out at night when you haven't slept for a few days. Additionally, since they are undead mobs, if it isn't raining when day comes, or if you manage to sleep in a bed, both to reset your insomnia counter and to skip to daytime, they'll start taking fire damage and burning in the sun in the same way that other undead mobs like zombies and skeletons do. The Smite enchantment will deal a little extra damage to them, so that's worth knowing as well, but generally speaking, phantoms are actually kind of weak. They don't survive too much direct attack. It's just kind of difficult to hit them if they're floating around in the air. We'll probably encounter phantoms a few more times, even though I sleep fairly diligently, and so we're going to add Phantom Membrane to our mob drop item filters here, and you'll notice I've already put ender pearls in that hopper there from having collected 10 overnight. Since ender pearls only stack to 16 instead of 64, we'll probably find that that hopper empties itself relatively quickly, and there's already one waiting for us in the chest there. But now I've had a chance to explain phantoms, we're going to dodge the rain by heading back down into the mountain cave and visiting the deep dark biome for the first time. You may recall that our last sighting of a deep dark biome happened down here in the lower regions of the world when we discovered this abandoned mineshaft in the episode talking about the additions of the Caves and Cliffs update. So I'm going to find a nice, easy spot to drop down here, probably, once again, relying on a bucket of water to make sure I can make a sensible descent, and it looks like the bucket of water I used last time is still left over here. This seems like a relatively sensible place to drop our bucket of water, so I'm going to hop on down here and immediately try and defend myself from any skeletons. And before we go too much further, I will note that I've brought 2 stacks of wool with me, of a nice visible color. I've picked yellow in this case. And that's not because I plan to make a bunch of beds or anything while I'm down here. It is because the deep dark biome has a lot of mechanics that have to do with sound, or more specifically, vibrations. And when the deep dark biome was added to the game, wool was given the property of dampening vibrations so that they cannot be detected by some of the blocks in here, which specialize in detecting vibrations. So as you can see right here, we have a little offshoot of the deep dark biome that has crept up into the stone layers. You'll typically find deep dark biomes generating lower down in the world, usually around the deep slate layers, and it is much more likely to be found underneath mountainous biomes. We actually need to be quite careful about being detected in here because there are some consequences if we are. But for now, it is safe for us to walk on these blocks. These are Sculk Blocks, these ones here, which if I break, drop some experience orbs, and Sculk Vein, which cannot be harvested using your fists or even most tools. And even if I use a pickaxe on some of this stuff, it is still just going to break down into experience orbs. If I use Silk Touch on it, however, that will drop the blocks themselves, and that is true of the Sculk Vein blocks here, even though those are kind of similar to glow lichen or vines in the way that they are placed. You can place them on any surface of a solid block, and the Sculk blocks, once picked up with Silk Touch, can be moved around, and they can always be broken later. So these form quite an interesting way of storing a small amount of experience orbs. They'll only give you 1 point of experience per block though, so typically speaking, it isn't always worth breaking these down as any kind of experience farm. The most effective tool for harvesting Sculk is a hoe with Silk Touch. I've got efficiency 4, I'm breaking 2 on this one, and mending, so we can quite easily break down a bunch of the blocks from around here and carry home as much Sculk as we want to, which is great, because I want to add some to my storage system. But as we go deeper into this deep dark biome, it is more and more likely that the Sculk blocks have generated some of these. This is a Sculk sensor, and this is the thing that's detecting vibrations as we make them in the surrounding environment. If I walk around on these blocks without sneaking, you'll notice that this thing lights up very briefly, and a particle, sort of like a sound wave, emerges from me and is picked up by the Sculk sensor. If I sneak, on the other hand, I should be able to travel around without it noticing me too much, although the splashing I make in the water is also going to alert the Sculk sensor. So the water being here is actually a kind of tricky part of this whole environment. We can, once again, pick these up with a Silk Touch tool, and the hoe is the most effective tool with which to do that. But it's worth noting that it's not just your footsteps that will end up triggering these Sculk sensors. In fact, anything that makes a vibration nearby can trip these Sculk sensors and cause them to detect the vibration. So if I place a torch over here, which I'm going to have to do for a few of these videos because it's going to be necessary to see in this environment on camera, you can see that the torch being placed is detected by the Sculk sensor. A vibration particle travels and causes the sensor to activate briefly. Other mobs will also trigger Sculk sensors, so the fact that this zombie spawner seems to have generated here is potentially a problem, although the Sculk sensors activating on their own is not a problem in and of itself. It's the consequences of them activating that are a little more dangerous. And as we looked back down this way, I noticed some of those consequences right there in front of us. So I'm going to do my best to descend here without these blocks over here being activated, but it's going to potentially be a little difficult because the water is flowing down here, and as I noted before, the Sculk sensors might actually detect me descending in the water. So I'm going to be a little bit more careful here, and I'm going to drop down using these wool blocks. You'll notice a couple of those lighting up, and that's probably because they are detecting a bat flying around in the vicinity. But that's okay, because it is only the actions of a player that should trigger the more dangerous elements of this Sculk environment. Dropping down onto these blocks of wool, which I'll place torches against just so they can be slightly easier seen, we should be able to descend into this cavern layer without being detected by these. I'm going to try my best not to take any fall damage as well, and then we're going to sneak up to this block here. This is a Sculk Shrieker, and these are the dangerous part of the Deep Dark, because anytime one of these is activated, it sends out a noise which is going to effectively function as an alarm for a creature called the Warden. In order to avoid being detected by this, one of the best things we can do in this instance is to check that there are not any other Shrieker blocks around, and to mine this with a hoe. And there you go, that block breaking was actually detected by a bunch of the Sculk Sensors, but the Sculk Shrieker could not sound the alarm because we had already broken it. At this point, it is safe for us to light up this area, except unfortunately there was another Shrieker hiding over there behind the pillar, and that is when some of the more dangerous stuff starts to take effect. We get a brief instance of this darkness effect where this pulsing wave of darkness rolls in and then recedes, and we have received our first strike. I'm going to try my best to deactivate this Sculk Shrieker here by removing that, and thankfully there were no other Sculk Shriekers in the vicinity, so once again, we are not going to be further detected by that. Effectively, in order to spawn the Warden, you have to be detected by those Sculk Shriekers 4 times. You get 4 strikes, and then the Warden will appear, and at that point, you'd better have an escape plan in mind, because you might need to start running. The Deep Dark biome itself does not inherently spawn mobs, but other mobs may wander in from adjacent biomes. And when they do, if you end up killing them near one of these, a Sculk Catalyst, something kind of interesting happens. There we go. First of all, we get the challenge advancement called It Spreads, and you'll notice that the zombies did not drop any experience, and bubbles started to emerge along the surface of the Sculk. When a mob is killed near one of these blocks, a Sculk Catalyst, that effectively spreads the Sculk, absorbing the XP into it and creating more Sculk blocks out of anything that can be converted in the surrounding area. And down here, that's usually stone-type blocks. That is, deep slate, regular stone, any of the andesite, diorite, or granite, any of the decorative stone types, and anything that cannot have Sculk spread to it will instead have this Sculk Vein grown over the top of it. And that will include things like ore blocks, so don't worry, you're not going to be missing out on diamonds or deep slate copper in this case, or any other ore blocks if you end up spreading Sculk nearby. Those will never be taken over by anything other than the Sculk Vein, whereas the stone blocks in the vicinity will be completely converted into these Sculk blocks. To make the area a little bit safer, I'm going to try and tidy up a few more of these Sculk Sensors. We can also take those with us if we want to, and I'll take a Sculk Catalyst with me as well, so we can observe its effects in a place other than the Deep Dark biome. Here is a great example of what I mentioned earlier, though. You can see down there that a couple of zombies have wandered into this area where there are Sculk Shriekers and sensors being tripped by the zombies' activity. Every time they walk around, the sensors are detecting their footsteps, and they will even relay those vibrations to other nearby sensors. On the other hand, this zombie isn't tripping any of the Sculk Shriekers, because the Shriekers are designed to only recognize player activity as something that sets off the Warden. In addition to that, once you have collected Sculk Shrieker blocks, you can basically do whatever you want to them and not be at risk of spawning the Warden. It is only the Shriekers that exist in a naturally generated state in their environment that actually trigger the Warden appearing. So right now, if I jump on top of this Shrieker, it's going to make the same horrendous noise, but you'll notice no heartbeat, no rolling darkness effect, and nothing that's going to trigger the Warden. Now I'm going to sneak around to the other side of this deep dark area and intentionally trigger a couple of the Sculk Shrieker blocks down here so that we can summon the Warden and get a look at its behavior. And this is going to be the creepiest thing that we have intentionally done in the survival guide so far, but I think it's worth paying attention to. So over here we should see a Sculk Shrieker block. This one seems kind of isolated from any of the Sculk Sensors, so this one isn't going to be tripped by us triggering any sensors nearby. However, if I walk on top of it, as I just did with the one that I set down as an example, you'll notice that that will trigger the darkness effect and we'll get that rolling, yeah, there we go, the shadows start to creep in around us. We can use this as a kind of test environment in order to spawn the Warden and observe its movements. We're going to trigger the Shrieker once more, and you'll notice that every time we have triggered a Shrieker so far, if we take a look at the subtitles in the bottom corner, now that we have 3 strikes, it says the Warden is drawing closer. On our 4th attempt, we should get a little bit further away from that origin point, because There we go. We hear the sound of the Warden, and of course I immediately trap myself in a hole, which is a very poor idea. Now, the Warden should appear somewhere over there in that Sculk-infested area. There it is. And within a certain radius of the Warden, we will have that darkness effect that I was talking about earlier. So we need to be a little bit wary of how close we are to the Warden, because if we get too close, we're not going to be able to see it. Now, the first thing to explain about the Warden is it is completely blind. It does not navigate by seeing the player or mobs around it. Instead, it can sense you in two different ways, the first being sound and the second being smell. Wardens will use those tendrils on their head, similar to the Sculk Sensors, to detect the environment around them in the same radius that a Sculk Sensor has, more or less. It's about 8 to 10 blocks you'll typically find they're able to hear you, and they can detect the same ranges of vibrations that Sculk Sensors can. So anything like placing blocks, firing projectiles, stepping near it will all activate the Warden's receptors, and it should try to zero in on your location. So sneaking or walking around on wall blocks is going to be vital. Once you put a bit of distance between yourself and the Warden, it will still try to sniff you out. You'll hear it sniffing, you'll observe it sniffing the air around you, and it will prioritize the smell of a player. So if it senses a player in the surrounding 25 blocks or so, it's going to try and seek you out. Otherwise, it will prioritize the smell of another nearby mob. Since the Deep Dark biome itself does not naturally spawn hostile mobs, you'll find that typically the Warden wanders around aimlessly looking for a target, and after 60 seconds without a target, it will simply burrow into the ground and disappear again. But the problem with this Deep Dark biome we found ourselves on the edge of is that mobs can wander in from surrounding biomes, and it's entirely possible that one of these creepers or skeletons or spiders is going to cross paths with the Warden, and it's going to take notice of them, at which point if they make enough noise near the Warden, or if they end up touching the Warden, it's going to get angry at them, and the angrier it gets, the more likely it is to attack. At the moment, this Warden mostly seems inclined to chase down whatever is beyond that wall, but I don't think it's going to be able to reach it, even though it does have a ranged attack and a melee attack, both of which are incredibly powerful. So the reason I'm not trying to fight this thing right now is that is a fight I'm not equipped to win. The Warden is effectively designed as a stealth experience. You're supposed to sneak around it using the environment and using blocks that you have brought with you to evade it instead of trying to attack it head on. It is technically possible to fight the Warden head on, but without significantly weakening it, buffing yourself, and coming equipped with things like totems of undying that can save your life instead of killing you, or enchanted golden apples that will give you extra health and a bit of damage resistance, you're going to find that the fight is one you lose very quickly. But having observed the Warden a little bit, I think it's probably best for us to leave at this point, because it seems like the Warden is going to be constantly detecting whatever is beyond that wall, and I don't really want to resolve this by trying to kill the Warden or having it detect me, so I'm just going to make my exit from the Deep Dark biome. We're going to take our findings home, and at a certain point, the Warden should lose track of any mobs that are beyond that wall. They should despawn once we get out of a certain range, and the Warden itself, once its environment is free of distractions, will simply burrow back into the ground and leave. In the meantime, you will still be able to hear the noises it makes and the heartbeat that it emits from quite a range, so it can often sound like the Warden is continuing to give chase even when it is not following the player, but keep that in mind as you explore these environments. And you can actually still hear it even up here on the surface, even after we have long left. And none of the stuff we're doing up here on the surface is going to be detected by the Warden, but the game is probably still spawning mobs down there, and so the Warden has a few distractions left in its environment. Now, back up here on the surface with the Sculk Blocks that we have retrieved from the Deep Dark, we're going to do a little experiment, and for that I just need to find a nice easy set of passive mobs, like up here, where there are some sheep and cows in this nearby meadow. If we place a Sculk Catalyst down next to this cow and kill it in the same way that we killed the zombie in the Deep Dark, you'll notice that no XP dropped from that cow, and the Sculk Catalyst kind of bubbled a little bit, although it did not immediately spread the Sculk to any of the blocks around it. I'm wondering, though, if potentially it spread the Sculk downwards to a cave somewhere nearby. That's currently inconclusive. I can't see anything around here that constitutes a cave that the Sculk would have spread to, so let's try moving it along. There we go. At last it manages to spread to some nearby blocks, and Any mobs that are killed within about an 8-block radius of the Sculk Catalyst will start spreading these Sculk blocks around, although the amount of blocks that spread is dependent on the amount of experience that mob would drop. And in this case, cows and pigs and whatnot don't drop a huge amount of experience when they are killed. You'll also notice that the Sculk blocks actually spread where the animal dies, not directly around the Sculk Catalyst. So the Sculk Catalyst will actually seek out blocks that are adjacent to the area where the creature gets killed. And one of the unusual aspects to this is that the Sculk will actually spread even if a creature is killed with environmental damage. Let's say this sheep ends up on fire. Well, perhaps a bit of a bad example because the sheep sort of wandered off there. And I found the perfect test subjects. Let's try setting some of these pillagers on fire, which technically will not count as a kill attained by the player. Even though these pillagers are being killed by fire or each other's arrows, technically not the player, you'll notice that the Sculk still ends up spreading. The Sculk Catalyst here picks up on their death and will spread Sculk to the blocks around where they died. There we go, the pillager captain ends up dying and the Sculk grows in a line, avoiding any of the blocks that had something on, like grass or flowers. So in that way, Sculk spreads similarly to moss, in that it will not spread to anything that already has a block placed over it. There must be empty air above the block the Sculk is trying to convert. Kind of funny that it made a P shape there for pillager. But this also has kind of enormous potential, because these Sculk blocks are going to give us experience if we break them without Silk Touch, and if we break them with Silk Touch, we're still going to get the blocks out of that. And in this way, we can actually generate experience out of what would otherwise be a passive mob farm. Take, for example, our cave spider spawner. If we drop those cave spiders onto a floor which had a Sculk Catalyst nearby, they would convert the nearby blocks into Sculk blocks, which we could later break down for their experience. And that is something I have done in the past on the Empire's SMP. I had a triple cave spider spawner there that I dropped onto a constantly moving floor of stone with Sculk Catalysts nearby, and the spiders dying would convert the stone into Sculk blocks, allowing me to harvest the XP later. There aren't a great deal of ways that you can AFK farm experience in Minecraft. A lot of them require a bit of player input, at the very least something to click a sword for you while you're away from your keyboard. And we'll explore some other ways of AFK farming experience in future, but for now, it is really interesting that Sculk has now become an option to us now we've visited the Deep Dark. In the meantime, Sculk Sensors present some really interesting opportunities as well, because these are... I was kind of fooled by the sniffer noise then. I thought the Warden had somehow made its way to the surface. No, the Sculk Sensors are actually also a redstone component. You see small redstone particles given off by them whenever you make a vibration nearby, and you'll notice that that switches on and off that redstone lamp there for roughly the duration that the Sculk sensor remains lit up. It actually turns off slightly earlier than the Sculk sensor does. And when it comes to the signal strength emitted by Sculk sensors, these actually get really interesting results as well, because if we step into the radius around the outside of the detection range of this Sculk sensor, if we're just making vibrations at a very low level on the periphery, you'll notice that it doesn't activate a huge amount of this redstone dust. It's only the first couple of blocks there that light up. Whereas if I stand a little bit closer, if I jump up and down next to the Sculk sensor, it's actually producing a different strength of redstone signal. If I dance around on top of this thing, it's going to be producing a very high redstone signal strength. And so it can actually detect how close you are to the Sculk sensor and emit a redstone signal that kind of matches that. The closer you are, the stronger the redstone signal. Alternatively, if you choose to detect the Sculk sensor with a redstone comparator, then it's going to emit a redstone signal dependent on what kind of vibration it is picking up. So right now, if I'm jumping up and down or if I'm walking around, it's only going to emit a signal strength of 1 or 2, depending on which vibration I'm making. Whereas if I place a block in the vicinity, if I put down, let's say, a piece of stone right here, that produces a different signal strength to when I'm just walking around nearby. But the other thing we can observe here, and something that we can also use to our advantage in the Deep Dark biome, is that wool and carpet are the exceptions to this. They will actually occlude the sound detected by the Sculk sensor. The vibrations cannot be picked up if it is muffled by wool on the sides where the vibration is being made. So if I walk around here while this thing is surrounded by wool, it's not going to detect me until I leave the radius of this wool and walk around to this side that is exposed. It will still be able to pick up on me doing something directly over the top of it as well. So this is a full spherical range in which it's going to detect whether or not there is a sound being made. And even walking directly up to the corner of this, it's going to be occluded by these 2 wool blocks on the corners. So this is actually a really powerful mechanic. We can do a lot by occluding the vibrations using wool. And in the deep dark biome down there in the cave, if we are worried about one of these Sculk Shriekers detecting our sounds thanks to the Sculk sensor transmitting that vibration, we can simply place wool around the Sculk sensor and prevent it from hearing us. It will also prevent it from passing the vibrations to any nearby Sculk sensors. Let's say if I end up breaking this comparator, the vibration from that is unable to pass through this block of wool and reach the Sculk Shrieker. So in a similar fashion, we can block off the Sculk Shrieker from receiving any vibrations from the Sculk sensor, and that's going to also prevent the Sculk Shrieker from being tripped. Finally, and we're going to cover this very briefly because it's going to be quite a complicated topic to get into in a single episode, with 3 amethyst shards, it is possible to turn a Sculk sensor into a calibrated Sculk sensor, which is only capable of picking up a specific frequency of vibrations. Without any other kind of redstone input, these will act in much the same way that other Sculk sensors do, although you'll notice that the redstone lamp doesn't stay lit for as long if we're using one of these calibrated Sculk sensors. However, these have a line of amethyst running down one side of the block, and if we input a specific redstone signal into that, it will only search for vibrations which produce the same amount of redstone signal output. So if anything else I do around here now, without needing to occlude it with wool, if I jump up and down, if I run around, if my footsteps can be detected by a regular Sculk sensor, they cannot be detected by these calibrated Sculk sensors. And in this case, I believe that even stuff like breaking and placing blocks will not be detected by the Sculk sensor. It has to be a very, very strong vibration. If we extend the length of this redstone dust a little bit so that the signal decays and it reaches a power of 13 before it gets input into the calibrated Sculk sensor, now we can place a block down in the world and that will activate this calibrated sensor, but it won't detect when the block is broken. Normally, without any kind of redstone input, it would detect if the block was placed, it would detect if the block was broken, it would detect any vibrations nearby. But now we're able to limit this so that it's only a block breaking that trips the Sculk sensor and activates the connected redstone. So hopefully you can imagine the possibilities of that for creating redstone contraptions that are only triggered by a specific vibration or set of vibrations, since these are actually organized into categories, and for that it's probably best if you look up the Minecraft wiki article about Sculk sensors, because that will give you a full list of the actions and vibrations that trigger Sculk sensors to produce various signals. For now, we're going to leave that there for our introduction to the deep dark biome, but it's a truly fascinating environment, and while it's kind of scary, it's also capable of producing a whole bunch of really useful stuff. And we're going to be taking a closer look at those in future, along with traveling to the structure that we found down there, the ancient city. For the moment, though, I am quite happy to be adding the Sculk blocks into my storage system, and that's where we're going to leave it for this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. Folks, I do hope you've enjoyed this look at the deep dark biome. Trust me, we're going to be spending a lot more time focusing on elements of the deep dark in the near future. And thanks for watching. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.